Puerpäivi. Vuostasin mua halitetne kihtit, kolletne otson vuohtit teikke Turku universiteetti, oassalastit ArtsEqual symposiumi. Mas gierdahallat visupnait sosiaala vuokkalas vuodas musiikka oappahussas.
Sosiaala vuokkalasvuosta juohtsaa erinomaisesti Sámi servolahkii täällä äikkii Suomas, koska jältäkastilli sosiaala ja kulttuurilas kaskavuoden chaukää. Moi jähke, että musiikka oappahussas lää tehalas rolla, kun mi hukse koova jänne hostavertaisessa vuohtevuodas.
Our presentation today focuses particularly on the exclusion of Sámi communities in Finland's basic education in the arts system. We discuss this in terms of music school accessibility for young people living in Sápmi, in the Sámi homelands, and also in terms of colonization, a frame for much of the arts teaching and learning of young people in all parts of the country. We approach this topic from two very different perspectives. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow in music education at the Sibelius Academy, University of the Arts Helsinki. My research this year has been together with Sámi artists and arts educators, focusing on their experiences of the arts education that has been historically and culturally normalized as the mainstream. Through their stories, I have tried to understand how this basic education in the arts system that has been founded on ideals of equality might actually work to reinforce societal privilege and marginalization.
I am the planner of Sámi Music Centre and a self-educated musician. I have graduated with the Bachelor of Humanities from Oula University, majoring in Northern Sámi language. I am a professional musician and have released now 4 albums in the Northern Sámi language. I have also worked in events, management, promotions, and as a manager for many Sámi artists. I began my work in Sámi Music Centre in the beginning of 2015. I personally think that every engagement with Sámi music or Sámi language, be it a short workshop for young children or a professional record release, is an important part of the living Sámi cultural heritage. In this presentation, we draw upon the Sámi stories and experiences shared with Alexis in over 20 meetings and interviews she held earlier this year with Sámi artists and arts educators, as well as my experiences as planner of the Sámi Music Centre, a project of Finnish Sámi Parliament located at the Sámi Cultural Centre Sajos in the village of Inari. The Sámi Cultural Centre is one of the most important organizations for the preservation and continuing development of Sámi musical cultures. The Sámi are recognized as the only indigenous people in the European Union. The Sámi homelands, Sápmi, are divided between the imposed national borders of Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Russia. Within Finland's borders, there are approximately 8,000 Sámi people representing 3 distinct cultural and linguistic groups: Tavi-Sámi kiela, Northern Sámi, Anaraskiela, Inari-Sámi, and North Sámjil, Skolt-Sámi. Each of these Sámi groups also has its own musical traditions. For instance, Northern Sámi joik, Skolt-Sámi leut, and Inari-Sámi livde. Traditionally, Northern Sámi joik describes a person, though one would usually say I joik him rather than I joik about him. So rather than description, it is kind of a second name. Besides individuals, people can also joik animals or places in nature. Musically, joik is quite complex form of music, with one joik being in what would in Western musical terms be referred to as different keys, tempos, and time signatures. There is usually also improvisation. Although joik can include words, mostly the joik syllables like hejo, loille, lo. Skolt-Sámi leut is quite different. Leuts always tell a story. If compared to Northern Sámi joik, leuts are more melodic and they have much more lyrical content. One could say that they are more like poems. As in joik, euphemisms are common, so understanding the actual content might be tricky, and the listener really has to read between the lines. Furthermore, the words are supplemented with special layered syllables, so they might be far from written language. Hence, we talk about layered language. Although one can also layer an animal, nature, or mythical events, person layered are the most common and often tell a story about marriage proposal. Inari-Sami livde is somewhere between yoik and layered. It has lyrical lines, but also yoik syllables like lo, 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 lo. As in yoik and layered, the most popular topics are persons, animals like a bear, which is a special animal in the Inari-Sami tradition. There are also situational livdes, which are stories about some exceptional events. During the last century, the livde tradition almost died out, but now for the last 15 years or so, there has been significant work in research and education to revive the tradition. In addition to these traditional music styles, there's a vibrant contemporary music scene where artists are composing and producing everything from these traditional music styles to monster rap.
Sámi children and youth face a number of challenges in accessing music education, be it the music of their own cultures and traditions, or Western art music, popular music, or anything else, which raises questions about how far the ideals of equality in Finnish music education reach. Already securing public funding in the late 1960s, music schools received transfers from the government based on the number of inhabitants of the municipality, and grants are awarded on the basis of the confirmed number of lessons that the music school gives. This means that most Finnish municipalities do provide local residents with a music school and receive equal resources per capita and per student. However, this principle of equality has also resulted in big differences in supply, demand, and accessibility between provinces. The most recent statistics describe a situation where 12% of young people living in the capital region are enrolled in extracurricular music studies, and over 90% of these can access a music school within 10 kilometres of home. In contrast, only 9% of students living in the Sámi homelands, be they Sámi, Finnish or otherwise, were enrolled in these art studies, many of whom had to travel over 30 kilometres for lessons. And these lessons might be taught in a small branch office where they could only choose from one or two instruments taught by a single teacher. One artist I spoke with explained the challenges children face when they leave home at such a young age to study art. A lot of young people move home straight after basic education. It is their only choice if they want to get further and study more. But they are very young. It is a very problematic age. But more than that, when you move to the city, it is a different kind of life. You cannot imagine what kind of problems you can have there. Even the question, how can I cross the road? It's hard sometimes for city people to even recognize that that could be a problem.
But this does not mean that Sámi communities up north don't have any alternatives to traveling long distances or moving away from home, though the music education we do and can offer is quite different to the systematic, goal-oriented approach of the mainstream music schools. We also face very different challenges to those of the basic education in the arts system. The Sámi Music Centre was set up in 2007 to support the preservation and further development of the traditional vocal music styles yoik, livde and laud, and to organize education for the living and evolving Sámi music. Furthermore, Sámi Music Centre provides resources for music production, promotes the image of Sámi music, and by doing so, increases the interest in Sámi music. Despite the name centre, it is not an actual building of its own, but a room. Similar to the Indigenous Peoples Film Centre, Skapma, and the Sámi Children's Culture Centre, Manno, the Sámi Music Centre employs a single staff member, me. The Sámi Music Centre has become an almost permanent fixture in Sámi Parliament, and it is expected that the project will continue for many more years. Despite this, funding is applied for an annual basis, so there is always the chance that next year the Sámi Music Centre will not exist. Our annual budget is around 115,000 euros, which should cover personal, administrative, performances, productions, festival, and also education expenses. The education we provide is mostly in the form of workshops run in different parts of Sápmi. These workshops are usually run by professional musicians. This year, the workshops we have run have been, for example, rap workshops, songwriting workshops, band workshops, traditional musics, such as Inari Sami Live the workshops for around 250 children, as well as workshops for school teachers. With an education budget around 10,000 euro to cover teachers' salaries, travelling and accommodation expenses, food when needed, equipment hires, material acquisitions, and so on, it is probably not surprising that Sami students living in Sápmi are not receiving lessons every week like those offered by the mainstream music schools. Young people might attend a single workshop in a year, and the workshop might not be available for them next year, as when I'm planning these workshops, I must think that, okay, this group got this and that, so next year they cannot get that much. I must give opportunities to others as well. Concerns over funding are particularly because we cover such a geographically vast area. Every kilometer we travel costs money, and these add up in hundreds or thousands when you are trying to offer music education to all children in North. And this raises the question, is there any point in organizing expensive music workshops in some distant village for only few children? In my opinion, absolutely. Who can say that those children do not have the right to receive music education? An equal right to those kids in the cities of southern Finland. Why should they be excluded of the joy of singing or playing an instrument or composing their own songs? If these workshops get even one person excited about making Sámi music or just continuing it with as a lifetime hobby, I believe we have done our job.
The attempts that have been done to improve music school access for minoritized groups in Finland have mainly focused on the language of instruction. In southern regions, it is possible to study in languages other than Finnish, with a number of music schools offering lessons in Swedish or English, the latter of which is not an official language or official minority language in Finland. Although the Finnish constitution affords the Sámi the right to maintain and develop their own language and culture, the publicly funded music school system does not provide any arts education in Sámi languages, despite these languages having official language status in the Sámi homelands and official minority language status throughout the country. Sámi young people learning in Finnish then might be learning in their third or fourth language. Furthermore, students learn through the pedagogies associated with Western classical musics, rather than the pedagogies of their own cultural backgrounds and traditions. Simply finding teachers that speak the same language as students can be a huge challenge, one that music schools have not taken on, but the Sámi Music Centre certainly has. However, what seems to happen quite often is that if there are many students from different Sámi communities learning together, they will teach and learn in Finnish as a sort of equal approach for all of them. One music teacher I met with described her own feelings about this. I would like my students to learn their own music heritage in ways that make sense particularly to those traditions. But I can't understand the Skald Sámi language well enough to communicate with my students. For so many years, young Sámi people were forbidden or discouraged from speaking their own languages. Now we are still forced to speak in Finnish because we don't have educated music teachers for every Sámi group. We are still losing our language and culture. Even when there are opportunities to learn Sámi musical culture and heritage, if it is taught and learnt in Finnish, Swedish or English through Western pedagogies and made sense of through the cultural frames of others, there is a very real risk of losing the nuances of what makes these cultures and musics unique, meaningful and important. This sense of loss has been discussed widely in terms of colonization.
When we think of colonization, images such as those we have seen in Standing Rock often come to mind, with roots to the Latin word colere, meaning to inhabit. Colonization often refers to settler colonization of land. However, the situation has been and still is quite different in Sápmi, but this doesn't mean that colonization does not exist. There is a significant body of research and post-colonial theory that refers to colonization not as an event but a process, one that is continually made, remade and unmade. contemporary research talks about colonization of mind. Rather than an explicit one-time removal of indigenous peoples from a place, colonization of mind is something internal, a process that makes people feel inferior and willingly abandon their culture and traditions. Through this, Sami culture is constructed something lesser, something uncivilized. Although this devaluing of culture is something that happens in your mind, it is also related to ideas of land and space and who has the right to occupy it. As Cherokee scholar Andrea Smith has noted, that this logic holds that indigenous peoples must disappear. In fact, they must always be disappearing in order to enable non-indigenous peoples' rightful claim to land. And this is what has happened to Sami people, and is the reason why many Sami born in the 50s, 60s and 70s did not speak Sami languages to their children, gave their children Finnish names, and did not teach Sami arts to the new generations. One area where this is, can clearly be seen today is through religious beliefs. One of the teachers Alexis spoke with mentioned that she had tried to visit local schools where there were many Sami but also Finnish students. She wanted to teach children just a little bit about yoik and what it means to Sami people. Some Sami elders had complained about this, warning her that she would send the children to hell when she was yoiking with them. This shows that even now many Sami people are devaluing their own music and being ashamed of their own identities and cultural background. Their solution is to disappear. I experienced this shame and confusion myself at school. So playground taunts and children's ideas of a social hierarchy are not restricted to UK, as we heard Diane and Ray speak about this morning. I could not understand why some of my classmates hated Sami people so much. It was difficult to feel happy about being Sami or wearing the Sami traditional dress in school events or performing Sami songs at school. This means that for those of us organizing cultural education for young Sami people, need to be particularly aware and reflective on our own thinking and beliefs if we are to counter this colonization of mind. My work is mainly trying to establish safe spaces for these young people to find, explore, enjoy and continue their culture free from oppression, whether it comes from other cultural groups or Sami people themselves.
These colonial frames are not only present in music education aimed particularly at Sami children, they can also be seen in the mainstream. One musician and music educator I spoke with described to me her experiences of learning in a music school. I was traumatized by my Sami background when I attended the music school. Everybody was always waiting for me to do something very Sami. Classical music was an escape from that ethno-trauma, to live a normal Finnish life. But then when I started learning at the music school, I was treated like Pocahontas. Being Sami was always a burden upon my shoulders. If the arts and arts education are part of the ways that we pass on our traditions, skills and knowledge, but also part of the ways that we enact social and cultural change, they have an important role to play in reimagining how we might do things differently. How can we counter these conditions of colonization and inequality so that Saminess is not seen as something lesser, and that cultural diversity is seen as a richness, as an asset, rather than a problem for us to overcome? Particularly amidst the intercultural and interpersonal tensions that have intensified following Finland's failure to ratify the ILO 169 agreement. Arts educators and policymakers, and also researchers, need to take a close look at the structures, policies and practices that result in inequity. Many of you might be familiar with this image or some iteration of it. So equality here is seen as everybody getting the same resources. Sorry, this one's equality, this one's equity. It's cut off. But so equality is that everybody gets the same. Equity, in contrast, on the right-hand side, is the allocation of more resources for some and less for others, depending on their needs and individual differences. Now this kind of picture works quite well if we're talking about short people trying to look over a tall fence. But if we use such an image to describe Saminess, it would mean that being Sami is seen as a problem, as a deficiency. It also suggests that we all want to watch the same ballgame and all face the same challenges, depicted here by the fence. Coloniality is not quite like that. It is not always identifiable, which would mean it could be easy to point out the bad guy and solve the problem. Rather, coloniality can be seen as a pervasive structure that frames how we all act. It framed how Oula and I wrote this presentation. Now, how we choose to act can reinforce this structure or unsettle it. With this in mind, we've been through this text a number of times to identify instances of coloniality in both of our thinking and discuss at length how we could counter these. It's not easy work, and work that is by definition ongoing. But what is important here is that there's no one person or structure to blame, and no one person or structure that does not share the responsibility to address and counter coloniality. Just because I am not Sami, or not Finnish, or not part of Finland's music school network, and not trained as a researcher of indigenous issues, does not excuse me from the conversation. Looking at this picture again, perhaps these three people should all look the same, but their paths beyond the fence and the way through the fence is different for each of them. There might be three doors. One is open, one is closed, and one firmly kept shut with locks and chains. But what is important here is that each of us holds the keys.